Has the migrant crisis overwhelmed DC public schools? Alex Nestor is an investigative fellow at Parents Defending Education. Joining me now with more on this story. Alex, welcome back to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Wow, this is something that we really have to pay attention to because it is a top three issue with voters coming up in this election for the presidency, and all of these down ballot races will be affected by immigration. You're talking about this over at parentsdefendinged.com. Talk to me about what you found.
Yeah, so through public records request, we found in DC public schools and several other districts throughout the country that the open border that the Biden administration has not addressed is overwhelming our school system. We know in DC public schools, for example, there were dozens of classrooms across the district that were nearly full because they have to take in these children. We also know that this puts strain in terms of teachers, staff, English as a second language teachers, instructors, as well as just the district budget overall. When kids come into the school during the middle of the year, that changes the total number of students, obviously, that the school is teaching. And schools have to submit, districts have to submit toward the beginning of the year to the state the number of kids that they're teaching for state funding. So this is a really huge issue we're seeing both in DC and across the country.
And then there are the attendant realities of children coming in who they don't have or haven't had previously access to proper medical attention. There are also children who may not be used to sitting in classrooms for sustained amounts of time. I mean, for American children raised in this country, born in the system, who speak English as their native born language, kindergarten can be a real strain if they've never had a preschool experience. And so we're talking about bringing children in, kind of guessing their age, and then putting them into classrooms with other children who have been normalized into public education because they had preschool experiences. Also, the fact that children are pretty brutal. Any difference in incoming children is usually met with derision. You know, kids are kids. It's not a statement against their own interests. It's just who they are. It's who we are as people. And so we're talking about chaos. All of the things that you've described and everything we can think about. If you have children, you know how this can be being in a new school for a kid who speaks English and knows a lot of people. Even if you move to a town where you have family, it's a very difficult transition, and it's unfair to these kids.
Definitely. I think what you just said there is the main point here. These kids did not choose to make the journey to cross the border to come into our country and then to go to whatever American city their families decided to, send them to. These are children, and what's happening to them is brutal. They have to face brutal conditions as they're making, their journey into the United States, and it's being incentivized by the Biden administration's failure to act to secure the border. And you're exactly right. What do these kids do when they're placed in a classroom and they don't know how to speak English, and schools might not have the resources to provide additional ESL teachers or what have you? It's also, you made a great point, we're not entirely sure. A lot of these kids don't come with, say, birth certificates, vaccination records. It's unclear what grade these children, some of them, should be placed in. So it's a really tough situation for these kids. And again, the adults in charge are failing them.
And you know what's really interesting about it just occurred to me as you were talking. You have American parents. So, the typical routine is you buy a house somewhere else, another school district, and you move there. So you're not moving from out of state or out of the country. You're moving from another neighborhood. You're basically changing zip codes. You get there and you go to the front desk to register your child to attend the school. And the first thing they demand is a birth certificate. They also want your kid's immunization records. They want two utility receipts to prove that you actually have gained residence within the district and you have a right to put your kid there. And then they take all of that documentation. They make you fill out reams of forms. Sometimes you can do it online, but most of it's an in-person experience. And then once they've verified all of that, they then will register your child to attend and assign them to a classroom. And then you begin to receive the emails, and you're in the club. Now you have access to the information you need to get your child's supply list, et cetera. But let's say you show up, you have your utility bills, but you don't have a birth certificate. Do you know what happens if you're an American citizen? Your child is not enrolled. You can't get your kid into school. You can't bring them and drop them off. against their wishes. If you don't register properly and give them every scrap of paper they demand, your child can't attend the school, and you might already be paying taxes there. You might be funding that building already. I find it extraordinary that these kids can show up and the educators are guessing their language, their age, guessing whether or not they've ever had immunizations, which the answer is no if they're coming from the Northern Triangle countries. Come on, we know they're not getting immunized down there. How is it that American taxpayers are allowing this travesty? It's unbelievable.
Right. This different treatment is definitely a huge issue. Actually, the education of migrant children is something that is mandated by federal government regulations. Title I and Title III require public school districts to teach migrant children and to create and track English language learning progress. So, this is something that's mandated by the federal government. It is in part funded by the federal government. And again, the federal government is failing to solve the core of this crisis, which is our open border, and therefore, causing a lot of strain in our school system.
Well, so the cost associated with hiring the ESL teachers, you mentioned earlier that there may not be funding for the ESL program to expand to include the other languages that present when children come from countries far flung across the planet. And so they show up, they have to figure out what language they're speaking, and then they have to find an ESL teacher who speaks that language to tutor that child or children. And so with the dispersion of the different people groups who are coming in, we're talking about 150 different languages, and our ESL programs in the United States are mainly geared towards Spanish and variations of Spanish. We really don't have a robust ESL language program with a huge amount of teachers just waiting in the wings to come in and teach kids all over the country. It's very hit or miss.
Well, right. And exactly. The ESL program, I think we already know we have some evidence to show that that's already strained, even regardless of the migrant crisis. We have, school districts, El Paso, Texas, great example. You have a school district trying to teach kids from Afghanistan, from Syria, from Iran, from all over the world. On their website there are dozens. It says that the district educates students that speak dozens of different languages. So, do we have a ton of ESL teachers who can teach all of these different languages? That's already a strain. Nonetheless, the amount of children that are coming into schools, especially during the middle of the school year when budgets have already been set for districts.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. We are so careful with our own budgets as regular people, but our government at the state level, at the federal level, and now with this crisis, the international level has wasted a ton of our money, and they continue to do so without regard to the impact on America's children or the taxpayers or the children themselves. These ESL language students deserve better than this. Alex Nestor, Parents Defending Ed is the website. You guys have such a great resource there for us. Thank you for joining me today on Stacy Washington Now.
Thanks for having me.
It's good to talk to you. Have a wonderful weekend. Up next, what are the ramifications of the Biden lawfare campaign against Trump? It's a backlash. I'll share why up next. And as I always like to tell you on Fridays, please download our app, share our program with your friends, let them know where you're getting your news and information. We'd be so glad to have us in their back pocket as well, getting our notifications and learning more about us. And don't forget to find more about me at stacywashington.us. You can check out all of my information there. We'll be back with more on President Trump right after this.